It's my pleasure this morning to introduce Mr. Paul McKellips. Mr. McKellips was in the motion picture industry for 25 to 30 years. And after that, he took multiple deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, teaching the armed forces there how to communicate better with the people of those countries. Taking a bullet for his troubles while he was deployed abroad, he was soon found back home. And so when the Foundation for Biomedical Research called and said that they needed a communicator, not necessarily a scientist, probably better not to be a scientist, to be their voice, it was Mrs. McKellips who said, yes, he'll take it. So that was 5 or 6 years ago, and since then, that's what Mr. McKellips has been doing. So I would like us all to welcome filmmaker, author, communicator, teacher, husband, and father, Mr. Paul McKellips.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I got into Montreal last night and read on the news where our Secretary of State was meeting with the Mexicans, and rumors were that we were about to invade Canada. So I want to let you know I'm the advance team. So we're just trying to find out where the vulnerabilities are and all that kind of stuff. That would be great news, wouldn't it? And also, for those of you who have been here a long time, I live in Washington, D.C., and I want you to know our Montreal Expos are in first place. And we're excited about that. And I'm telling you, you're seeing Expo jerseys all over the place. So they may be gone, but they're not forgotten. So it's a good thing. All right, well, you just need more of a crowd back in there. Yeah, that was the problem, is we just didn't get the crowds. And now, of course, when they're winning, everybody wants to show up, but I'm sure next year when they fall off, the crowds will go down again. That's typically how that works. I want to share with you, for the last 5 years, as Joe was saying, I've been traveling the United States, Europe. This is my first trip to Canada as for biomedical research, so it's a pleasure to be here. And now I think I've got 3 more times this year that I'm speaking in Canada. And so I want to give you a little bit of a background. Would you hang with me for about 3 or 4 minutes as I talk to you about insurgencies? Trust me, in 3 minutes, it'll make a lot of sense. In both Iraq and in Afghanistan, I was the media advisor to our General Petraeus. I was training the Iraqi National Army, and I was also training Iraqi broadcasters how to deliver difficult messages to the public, to get the public to understand in difficult situations. The surge that we went through in 2006 and 2007 was a counterinsurgency strategy trying to win the hearts and minds of the people. That's what we're trying to do, is get the people to agree or give you permission to go forward. Whether we're dealing with al-Qaeda in Iraq or the Taliban in Afghanistan, where I was in 2011, the opposition always uses violence and fear and intimidation and lies in order to win the hearts and minds of the people as well. So everybody's in a battle to get people to believe it their way. Every insurgency that I've seen in the Middle East and all of these other countries has 4 very similar traits. And those are secret terror cells. They use violence, fear, and insecurity. They want to try to influence public opinion, and they attack authority. And every one of them has the same 5 characteristics. There's a political wing, a legal wing, a social wing, the violent wing, as well as the subversion part, trying to destroy the moral integrity. When we do counterinsurgency communications, or what we call counterinsurgency comms, our job is to communicate with the public first. If we start to talk with the public, then we find security happens. The lack of security and the violence takes place when nobody talks. But when you start the dialogue, then the violence drops off. I want you to just take a quick peek at this. See if I can get this thing here to work. In Iraq, we got to a place where we were having 2,000 violent acts per day. Bombs going off, murders, all that kind of stuff. Right here, we started to institute communications with the public. We started doing radio and television and outdoor and having public town meetings and all that kind of stuff. As soon as we start to communicate, the violence plummets. It goes down immediately. Well, does any of this sound familiar? Well, it should, because the animal rights movement, the extreme animal rights movement, operates like an insurgency, especially in the United States and Europe, and it is growing and developing here. They use the same tactics: secret terror cells, violence, fear, and insecurity. They try to influence public opinion. They attack authority. In the States, we have 5 characteristics. The political wing, the Humane Society of the United States. Perhaps you've heard of them. You'll see them in a little bit. Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine takes up the legal part. PETA takes up the social part. The Animal Liberation Front and SHAC take up the violence and the fear and the insecurity. And then Stop Animal Exploitation and Negotiation is Over take up the subversion side of the house. Folks, if you're in neuroscience dealing with non-human primates, there is such an international target on your back. Nobody, no other work with animals is more vulnerable to an international animal rights extremism than the folks that are doing neuro or pain studies and anything that's dealing with non-human primates. And we see it across the world, and it's growing. But here's an example of how they start to work the political ways. Do you get these commercials up here on TV? Do you see them?
Every day, thousands of animals throughout America are neglected, tortured, and often killed. They can't speak up or fight back against animal abuse, but you can. For just $19 a month, you can join the Humane Society of the United States.
So in this case, we've got a famous actress. We've got Sarah McLachlan playing the music in the background.
The United States is the nation's most...
And we see abandoned animals. Now, I assume everybody in this room is an animal lover. When you see those images, nobody likes it. We hate it. You know, if there was anything we could do for an abandoned animal, I think everybody in this room would do something. The problem with a group like this is, as you can see, they have 11.5 million members. They generate $130 million per year through these ads and efforts. They have 600 employees, 21 part-timers, 25 lawyers on staff, 2,000 pro bono lawyers, a network of law students across the country. They spend $38 million in salaries. The problem is right here. Less than 0.5% of their budget helps an animal. Folks, you make a donation to this kind of a group, and you've got a better chance of feeding a lawyer than you do of an abandoned animal. Less than 0.5%. What are they after? The Humane Society of the United States advocates an end to the use of animals in research and testing that's harmful to the animals. So what we see is people that are dressed up talking about abandoned animals and helping the animals and working the shelters. Now, your local animal shelter is a terrific organization. They're the ones that are doing the great works. It's the national groups, the overarching groups that raise on behalf. They show this. For example, you remember Hurricane Katrina that hit New Orleans, 5, 6 years ago. They came out right away with a commercial about all the animals that were suffering down there. They raised something like $14, $15 million in 2 weeks to take care of the animals. They forgot to give any of the money back to the folks in New Orleans to take care of the animals. So this is the kind of organization that we see that does political work across the country. Then we've got the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Here's their ad that's playing throughout the United States. That's a cheeseburger in his hand.
High cholesterol, high blood pressure, heart attacks. Tonight, make it vegetarian.
So the whole notion there is that because of your lifestyle, you're causing your own illnesses. So because you choose to eat meat, you're going to have heart disease. And if you're going to have heart disease, why should any innocent animals in a lab be responsible for testing to find out medications and procedures to save your sorry rear end? If you wouldn't eat the stuff you did, you'd be just fine. The problem with the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine is that there are not any physicians who work with the organization. Now, when you look at this, let me go back to this. Remember this guy when he was on TV? Now, I'm too young to remember him, but apparently some of you do. But he was The Price is Right. When he was on TV, it was all great stuff. You know, talking about spaying and neutering your animals. It was a great idea. Terrific stuff. Then he retires from the game show, and he is now funded so that we have 134 law schools in North America that are offering animal rights law classes so that young lawyers, because apparently we have a shortage of lawyers, we need more, so that young lawyers can sue on behalf of the animals. Folks, in the United States, we've had 232 lawsuits filed by dairy cows against their farmers for cruelty. I kid you not. Now, all 232 have been thrown out of court because a cow does not have standing in a courtroom. But you've all heard of San Francisco, right? It won't be long before the court system out of San Francisco, which tends to do crazy things, is going to say, you know what, the cow's got a point. It's not going to be long to now give the non-human primates names and citizenship. We have, in the States and same in Canada, we have always looked at animals under Old English property law, that you own the animal. The new modern animal rights movement doesn't want any kind of animal ownership. And in fact, they want to make sure if there's any chance that you are making a dollar and have something to do with an animal, they want to shut down the use of that dollar. So even in research, you know, you get your grants, you get your funding, you are making money, and the use of animals is somewhere in that equation. So you can see why these groups are getting that way. I want you to watch this video. It has now played 3,600,000 times in the United States in the last 2 years. I'd be curious to find out afterwards if somebody knows if it's playing in the schools up here as well.
All right, bring him out. Hold him down. Let's just get it over with.
Testing. 1,
2, 3. Come here.
I want to take you on a trip. It won't be pretty.
Look. What do we see?
Testing, testing.
Animal testing.
They get hurt. Bad.
Bad.
The kind of burning,
Eating.
Fear-producing.
cage circling,
Screaming.
screaming hurt that we shudder to even imagine.
All in the name of research.
Testing. 1,
2.
3. Does a rabbit wear mascara in the wild?
Do you hop around laying pellets in your pad? Hope not.
Animals react to drugs differently than we do.
Because mice are not little men.
Because mice are not little men.
Because they can't tell you how much it hurts.
Bottom line, their systems are different than ours.
Remember, it hurts.
They bleed just like we do.
They suffer just as we do.
They feel lonely and sad, just like we do.
They want to live
Just like we do.
because when it comes to pain, hunger, and thirst,
And not wanting to die,
we're all basically the same.
all this while more sophisticated non-animal test methods exist.
Because testing on animals gives faulty results.
Because it was wrong when we did it to orphans blacks, GIs, and gypsies.
And it's wrong when we do it to animals.
Because we can't explain what we're doing to them. If we could, what would we say?
It is unscientific.
Unscientific.
You can't accurately apply the results to humans. Because life in a steel cage is no life at all. Because after all this,
You know, it's just
plain
Wrong.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing.
Well, you can imagine if your 9-year-old child comes home from school after seeing that video and then asks you what you do for a living. And as this propagates, you've got to understand we're creating an entire infrastructure of 9-year-olds who are going, it doesn't relate. Why would you use animals? There are much better alternatives. I've spoken at several elementary schools, and kids will tell me there are much better alternatives. Why don't you use alternatives? Like, great. What would you recommend? What you got? Because frankly, if there was a viable alternative, it would be a lot cheaper and a lot easier, wouldn't it? Terrific. And we would gladly change it if we could get closer. But until that time takes place, there is a lot of propaganda out there that we've got to overcome. Then you've got the whole violence, the fear part of it. You know, mostly in Canada, I've seen the extremism on environmental extremism. Some of the Occupy movement came up this way as well, and there is now a growing animal rights issue. If you look over on the far left, that's a University of California researcher. This was the PI. He had the nerve and the gall to do research on fruit flies. And look what they did to his car. And he and his children had to get out of the second floor window because they torched the front door and put the house on fire as well. Now you tell me which one's terrorism. This is the guy's car at California. This is a Humvee that was in front of me in Iraq. And just randomly blowing people up for whatever reasons. There is a violent and a terrorist aspect to this. In the United States, I will tell you, that the #1 FBI domestic terror threat is animal rights extremism against scientists and researchers. One of the things I like to do, the animal rights group loves to get infiltrator video. They want to hire one of your students, one of your employees to go in, bury a camera somewhere on their bodies and get compromised video so that they can put it up on the net and raise some money. So one of the things I have done in the last 5 years is I've been hiring animal rights extremists to get undercover video of their own groups. I think that's so cool. And they're going, you'll pay me for that? I go, yeah. So when you hear them in their own words talk about what their agenda is, it's a little bit chilling. It's a little chilling.
There's a certain element of militancy in saying, like, no, I will not allow you to further enslave and torture these animals, as I will not allow you.
Is this what you think an animal rights activist looks like? Think again.
With the Animal Liberation Front, I would be willing. I would be willing to go into a lab and take the animals out. I would be willing to do that. I'm a stepmother and a housewife.
No concern for law.
Then you have a chance, of course, of being arrested and put in jail for years. But drastic times take drastic measures.
I felt like any amount of prison time I would do would never compare to what those animals had to go through. So it was certainly something I was willing to do. And the tactical approach that we took just simply came through a natural escalation of trying different things and seeing what worked and seeing what didn't. And I feel like we finally arrived at something that actually got the job done.
Actions where you're actually physically damaging property, from spray painting to breaking windows to setting fire to vehicles. Personally, I don't have a problem with those things.
There was people doing a variety of tactics outside of SHAC, the organization. I mean, there was illegal action. One of the people involved in HLS, his yacht was sunk. So there was there was vandalism.
You can arrest individual activists or pass repressive legislation, but next week we're going to update the website with brand new actions, and things are going to continue.
And the fact is that what happens to animals is so bad and just so egregious that it does justify acting outside the law, and I think you're gonna continue to see that.
No concern for science.
When we do make progress in medical areas, it's really despite and not because of the animal research that's being done. It may be that someone will come up with something that's helpful while doing animal experimentation, but that doesn't really mean it's because we did it on animals that we learned that this worked. It's really despite that barrier that we have in the way.
No matter how many species of animals you choke some drug down their throats, it does not predict what's going to happen when you give it to the first human being. So despite all of the animal trials, they're still the first human beings that get the drug, and we do not know what's going to happen to them. In fact, more than half of all drugs which are tested on animals, once they start into the human trials, have to be taken off the market because of unforeseen side effects.
Like what I was just talking about, how they're addicting monkeys to crystal meth and nicotine. I mean, this is typical of what goes on. What they do to animals in repetitive studies that go on for years, which involve burning them, shocking them, drowning them, poisoning them.
We need to get rid of the myth that animal research is necessary, that it's helping people.
You are the enemy.
The atrocities that are committed in laboratories are horrendous, and these are the same things that the Nazis did to Jews.
So I think these researchers have been made increasingly uncomfortable on a personal level, much like a Nazi concentration camp guard should have been made increasingly uncomfortable.
Well, you have to hold these people accountable. I mean, it's the same thing we do with sex offenders, which is totally analogous to what animal researchers do.
Nazi concentration camp guards, pedophiles. See, this is the ridiculous rhetoric that's out there. Now, for those of you who are starting to get a little bit depressed, I'm only going to depress you for 3 or 4 minutes, then I'm going to come get you, and I'm going to bring you way up, okay? So I'm going to take you down. We're going to go a little further down, and then I'm going to come back and get you. There's this new group out of Florida. Have you heard of them? Negotiation is Over, NIO. They offered a bounty last year to for any University of Florida student who would turn in and identify any freshmen who were coming in to study in their animal sciences program, that were working to go into a laboratory or going to be doing anything in animal enterprise to make a buck. Offered $100 bounty if you turn them in, get a photo of them, their cell phone number, and their email address, as well as any professors and their home locations who do anything with animals. 13 students dropped out. Lawsuits have been filed. I mean, the home demonstrations at these profs' homes has been unbelievable. The woman who runs it, well, I'm not even going to show her first. I'm going to tell you who the one is behind it. Dr. Stephen Best got his PhD in philosophy from the University of Chicago, and now he's the associate dean at the University of Texas, El Paso. He's also one of the co-founders of a group called Occupy Wall Street. And he is now lecturing across the world about what we should do to animal exploiters. And so he helped form the group in Florida as well. I want you to understand, he's banned from entering 5 countries, but he speaks to hundreds of thousands of students in Canada and in America and in Asia. I want you to hear him. I had one student in Asia film him and send this to me. I apologize, there's a very bad word in there that I'm sure none of you have ever heard before, so it's going to violate some of that. But I want you to hear this guy in person.
dobbiamo avere
The thing we should fear the most
La cosa di cui dobbiamo avere più paura
is letting the animals down.
è di lasciare gli animali andare.
The thing we should fear the most
La cosa di cui dobbiamo avere più paura
is not doing enough.
che non la stiamo facendo abbastanza.
You can be in prison, in a physical space, in jail.
Possiamo stare in prigione.
You can be in prison in your mind, knowing you're not doing enough.
Quindi non fare mai abbastanza.
So let's take the fear
Quindi sentiamo la paura
that we might feel
che dovremmo sentire
and do it anyway
e facciamo qualsiasi cosa
and bring it to them.
e portiamolo agli animali.
I want them to feel the fear.
No, scusate.
Every animal exploiter, every motherfucker who hurts animals is going to feel the fear.
Ok, dobbiamo prendere la nostra.
So that is the intent of the movement, is to intimidate and to try to frighten you and to get you to not go into research because animals are involved. And then this is the gal from Florida who is leading this movement over the internet. For any of you men out there that are single, she's still single, and after you've heard her on camera, you might be interested.
The enemy expects us to cower in fear in their presence, so we must go forward defiantly. Imagine a movement of activists that had zero fear and were mentally prepared to fight this war on our terms. They might be able to eliminate one or two of us, but they could never stop us all. Defiance is a virtue. Fearlessness is power. It's time for us to begin to stand up and organize. We don't have a choice in this matter anymore. Every social movement that came before us recognized you get angry, they don't really care. You organize, that's when they start to pay attention. That's when you start to move forward. We're talking about a Holocaust where animals are brutally killed by systemic industrialized abuse. We don't have an option to sit here and do nothing. We don't have an option to talk about these things anymore.
Wouldn't you like to bring her home to Mom? It's triggering an international movement. Well, now we're seeing in the EU has got substantial problems, and this is where I've been focusing a lot of my attention. Right now, they're doing everything possible to shut down the transportation of research animals. I'm sure you've been reading and following that, especially when it comes to non-human primates. There's no carriers anymore that want to bring non-human primates into the United States. And even if you do get them into LAX on a private charter, the bag handlers won't touch it. It's too volatile, too much issue. And in the EU, they don't want to put them on trucks, trucking companies, over the ferries, the English Channel. Nobody wants to touch it. Novartis, just in the last couple of weeks, tried to find an individual small plane that they could bring in non-human primates out of the Caribbean and fly them in the middle of the night into Basel. And then they had to shut down because somebody at the transportation company talked about it. Now we've got issues with the research breeding facilities, the ones that breed the beagles, the ones that breed non-human primates, the ones that breed our knockouts and et cetera. They want to shut down. I was called in first part of April because in Italy, Article 14 was coming up in the national legislature. The House of Delegates had already said no more breeding of dogs, cats, or monkeys. No more. Well, found it amazing that in Italy, not one university stood up and explained why they had to use dogs, cats, or non-human primates. Nobody wanted to talk about it. The pharmaceutical companies that were there, and you know who they are, there's 4 big pharmaceutical companies that are doing applied research right there using all 3 models. Nobody wanted to talk about it. None of the associations, the advocacy groups, wanted to talk about it. And so they called us and said, will you start doing messaging into Italy? That is like calling the fire department, your house is on fire, and saying, can we get some smoke detectors? It's a little late. If you don't start talking before that, it's a little bit late. So what is happening in the EU is we're starting to see the great migration take place. The migration of research and development leaving the EU and heading to Brazil and to India and to China. The amount of expansion we're seeing in Shanghai is unbelievable, because people would rather move their R&D than to talk about why they use animals. So we started doing a national campaign, and we started doing TV commercials and outdoor busts and all this kind of stuff in April. And I posted my name and how to get a hold of me, because I figured some folks might have an issue with me. So you can see, I don't know if you read Italian, but I highlighted there enough, they didn't like me, is really what that boiled down to. And then I get this curious thing. From this PhD, he's a researcher. He does really important intellectual stuff, baseline cellular HIV DNA load predicts HIV. It's really good. I'm just telling you it is. But he says in Italian, Vitello Apiglia, it translates in English to, he didn't like me. And then I get a letter, an email from NIH. Now, this is National Institutes of Health, obviously in the States, that does all of the funding at the university level, or most of the grants. And Kathy from NIH writes, do not write me again. Long live Italy. I totally agree with what they're doing, which is to stop the use of animals in research, and not what you are doing. See, the problem is we're a little bit divided amongst ourselves. It's a crazy dynamic. So what happens? 1,000 protesters go to Green Hill in Montechiari, Italy. Green Hill is a beagle breeding facility owned by Marshall Farms out of New York. Perhaps if you've seen beagles used in research, you know where they come from. The police stood back as the researchers went over the barbed wire, got into the animal facility, and started handing out beagle puppies. If that wasn't bad enough, the Italian authorities went in to liberate the animals and bring them to Rome for national television as though they had done this massive cocaine bust, and here's the bounty. Here are the dogs that we've liberated. The public was thankful that no longer would animals be used in research, and these animals were liberated. By the way, they followed all the right protocols. These animals were not abused. They followed they had been inspected quite often, no infractions. They had IACUCs in place. Everything was protocol. The problem was in Italy, none of the researchers were willing to speak. And so the template has begun. The template has begun to go in and shut down because they know you people in the biomedical research industry, in the community, are not likely to communicate with the public. That's the plan. Well, in 2009, we saw this happening in the States, and it was getting out of control. In the States, what has happened over the last 30 years is that when the animal rights movement began in earnest in the late 70s, early 80s, the scientific community didn't know what to say, so they said nothing. And in the 5 years that I've been with FBR, I've enjoyed how scientists, PhDs, everybody else involved wants the science to speak for itself, and rightly so. I understand that. But when you're attacked, somebody has got to speak up. Somebody's got to make the connection. And as Joe was indicating before, not too often do we want to put a scientist in front of the television cameras for an interview. Not too often, because we're going to get these big, long words that the folks at home go, huh, why do you do that? So in 2009, we just launched a campaign, a national campaign, which has now become international, that says research saves. And we're just trying to make the point that what you do is so incredibly important. And we're trying to get you to be very, very proud of what you do in regard to the public circle. We've been running television ads in the United States on Animal Planet, BBC America, Plant Green, MSNBC, everywhere we do it. Here in Canada, I'm sure you have the same thing where you have a set-top box. Whether you have cable or satellite TV, you've got a set-top box. When you signed up for that TV service, your demographics are in there. That's how you pay your bill. And how many receivers do you want in your house for how many different TVs? We have the same thing throughout the world right now. Those smart boxes, every morning at about 2 in the morning, they're polled, remotely polled to see what did you watch. They watch what you watch. So they know what channels you're watching. They know what commercials you started to see and you got out of it right away. So we can monitor how effective our national and international TV commercials are because we watch, and we find that viewers watch 97% of our commercials. Nobody's flipping out of them. Let me tell you, this is the first one that we've run, and it's powerful. How do you like it so far?
I am a scientist. I am a biomedical researcher. I am working hard to find treatments and cures for breast cancer. I am not an actress dressed up in costume. I am somebody's daughter, a sister, a wife, somebody's best friend. I am, for 5 years now, a breast cancer survivor. I am still surviving after my cancer returned last year. I am studying human breast cancer in rodents. I am fighting for you. I am fighting for me. Who am I? I am an explorer on the outermost edges of medical discovery. I am a biomedical research scientist. You did good, yes you did.
Folks, that's the first time I've ever been into a lab. I didn't realize you had to go in, put these little booty things on and a hat thing, and you got all this little stuff to walk in with these, oh, the animals, oh, you got to dress up. I never had been in a lab before. Are you kidding me? And I go in there and I see all these rats, and I go, that's cool. They pull one out, and it's got this huge tumor on its rear end. And I go, what's wrong with the rat? They said, that's breast cancer. The rat's got breast cancer? No, no, no. It's got a breast cancer tumor. Now, I'm not a smart guy. 7th grade, 8th grade, when it came time to take more biology classes to do science, I said, I'm going to theater. Had enough of that. I'm not a smart guy, but I look at this and I see a breast cancer tumor on the back of a rat, and I go, oh, wait a minute. Couldn't you try different chemo drugs and different pills to see if you could knock that tumor down? Yeah. Now, when I made that aha moment, I went, you gotta be kidding me, how cool. And they go, oh yeah, we can get rats with Parkinson's in it, with Alzheimer's. Now, I can't tell you, I don't know if they're knocked in, knocked out, knocked up. I don't know what kind of rats these are. I don't know how you do that. But as John Q. Public, I go, wow, that is so cool. This is the first time that a lab animal has been on a national TV commercial, because most facilities say, don't talk about the animals. Shh. We've been doing that for 30 years. We don't talk about the animals for fear, what are the people going to think? Now, there's parts of animal research that aren't pretty. But I'm here to tell you, there's parts of breast cancer that aren't pretty. There's parts of Alzheimer's that aren't pretty. It's a nasty area in disease research. But when I see that and I show that to focus groups of women, literally, I've got women crying within about 40 seconds. To hear a researcher who herself is a stage 4 breast cancer patient, and she looks into the camera and she says, I'm fighting for you and I'm fighting for me. She says, damn it, until I'm gone, I'm going to fight to find this cure. I'm telling you, when people see that, it is powerful and it resonates. How do we win the hearts and minds of the people when it comes to the research that we do that's difficult to explain? We do it first with emotion. I know that's kind of contrary to science, so sorry. But it's the emotion part. Once you connect with people about the emotion, about the disease or the condition, I know you're working on really cool stuff, but until you're dealing with mental illness and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and people understand that patient experience, until they get that, they can't appreciate what you do. We start with emotion and then we put it to reason. Now, one of the things we have to do in order to communicate with the public is to let them understand something. In many homes, and probably here in Canada as well. People love their pets more than they love their adult children who move back in and live in the lower level. We love our pets at a ridiculous level. You know, 40, 50 years ago, when I was a kid growing up in Wisconsin, the slowest chicken in my grandmother's front yard of her farm was Sunday dinner. And when my mom and grandmother got that chicken, it was not pretty and it didn't sound good, but none of us thought twice. It was a rural lifestyle. As a child, I went deer hunting. I didn't think twice about the fact that I would load up the freezer for several months with venison. But now, it's whole different changes. So we have great opportunity when we tell people about this.
This is Emma. She's a 1-year-old rescue dog with bilateral cranial cruciate ligament tears in both rear legs. The injury is similar to that seen in ACL injuries in humans, with surgical repair done in a similar manner to repair the injury.
The knee joint should not move independently, and you can see in Emma that there's a lot of instability which is causing the pain and lameness and the arthritis that's setting in.
Well, there's always a little bit of anxiety surrounding surgery.
This surgery was developed, both parts of it, the arthroscopy and the stabilization part, were developed through animal research in a translational mechanism so that we help both the 4-legged patients and the 2-legged patients on the human side. We do very small incisions and the dogs are allowed to get back to function much more quickly because of the advances through animal research.
Now it's rock solid stable, so we can't even budge that in her internal rotation. It's great.
And the procedure went perfect. I mean, I'm very happy.
Animal research saves animals too. researchsaves.org.
So when we start to communicate that our research not only benefits humans, but it benefits animals, people start to get it. You know, we love our pets. And I've had so many pet owners say, I want you to stop animal research immediately. And I said, great, where's your dog going to get its next vaccine? What are you going to do when your dog needs surgery? You okay with it just dying? How about the new pet foods that you see in the store that are perfect for a puppy and the ones that are for the senior citizen dogs? How do you think they make those announcements on the packaging? You have to do the research. When people start to grasp it in portions that they can understand, the power takes place. We've also been putting out a magazine. If you look at this one up on the left in Houston, Texas, at the Houston Zoo, their African elephants were dying with a herpes virus. They get born, they die. Born and die. Wasn't going over well with the public that every couple of months there's another announcement of an African elephant dying at the Houston Zoo. So they get a hold of Baylor College of Medicine and said, can you help us with this? They're seeing an opportunity to do something that the whole public will understand. They came up with a test where they could test immediately to find out if these African elephant babies had the herpes virus, and they did, and then they could start to treat them along those way. So the Houston Zoo named the elephant Baylor. And so now we have a terrific corporate partnership that takes place between the research community and the public. We've done a TV series. We do half-hour TV shows now where we go into a facility. We go into the University of Notre Dame or Duke University or the University of Chicago or UCLA, and we will now show the animals on TV what we're doing. Incredible research at University of California, Irvine that we filmed a couple of months ago, where it's spinal cord injuries and they're using rats, and the rats have nerves in their spinal cord severed, so it replicates it, and then the stem cells. When people see this, folks, they go, wow, we are close. We are close to some incredible, powerful things. And then we do billboards across the country. We find areas that are problematic where the animal rights groups are kicking in. So here's one we did last year. Who would you rather see live? Rather, rat, her? Who would you rather see live? Would you like us to do these things to help her live? Or do you just want all of the rats to live? Now, I understand this might be confusing because apparently that's a mouse and not a rat. I wouldn't know the difference. So for only it's the science geeks who go, I don't get it. It's a mouse. The rest of us are going, yeah, mouse, rat, whatever. Before we did this campaign, we were seeing 45 to 50 violent felonies against scientists every year. In 2009, when we started to launch the campaign, the felonies and the violence fell. Folks, remember what I was saying from Iraq? As soon as we started to communicate, violence falls. When we start to communicate, violence falls. Most of the people in security tell us, Don't talk. It'll bring attention. And as I go around and I teach security folks, I go, it's just the opposite. It's when your people start to talk that security gets greater because the public won't tolerate it. They understand what you're doing. In the United States, 1948, 85% of the public supported the use of animals in research. In 2008, it was down to 49%. Folks, I don't know if you're watching our presidential election and campaign. It's theater. I think both are idiots, but that's just my opinion. The problem is when public support falls below 50%, then new laws come in, new restrictions. At the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where they have the primate center, they're trying to pass a law in the county where the university sits. And the law simply says, if you do any invasive procedure on an animal, it constitutes cruelty. And they define an invasive procedure as being a blood draw or more. So they're trying to find ways. When public support falls, then the laws come, and then research is going to suffer. Once we've been doing this communication, in 2009, public support jumped a little bit. 2010, up to 57%. In 2012, as we stand right now through the end of August, we're at 64%. We moved public support almost 15 percentage points by telling them what you do and letting them understand. One of the things I like to do is I do monthly tracking poll. I poll 2,000 adults. I do polling in Europe. I haven't done any polling in Canada because it has been relatively quiet, but it is getting more so, especially out in the west part. In Vancouver and British Columbia, we're seeing a lot more activism. But one of the things we do, and we find this is the same wherever we go. Whatever country we're in and we're doing polling, we know who's opposed to the use of animals in research. So let me ask you, think it's men or women? I'm glad a woman said that, because if a man said that, he'd be dead. Yeah, it's women. Do you think it's white women or black women? Do you think it's conservative women or liberal women? There was a little mix. Folks, 43.7% of all white women who are liberal-leaning, Protestant, religious, college degrees between the ages of 29 and 54, they're the ones that oppose the use of animals in research. Now, let me make a clear distinction. They are not going to blow your Volvo up. But they're opposed to it. They are opposed to the use of animals. And when we run our ads, I'm after that demographic. I try to advertise and communicate with women between the ages of 29 and 54. That's what I'm after. Now, quickly, when they see and they understand, they quickly shift, and the change takes place. But they are the influence makers in our society. In our household, they're the ones that make a lot of the purchasing decisions in our household. And let me tell you something. It's the #1 demographic in our public schools. It's the teachers, that demographic. And when they don't support the use of animals in research, trust me, they are going to teach our children in a different direction. So one of the things I like to do is I do focus groups. I bring 100 women into a hotel conference room, and for 2 hours I start them off and get them all angry with you, just like I did today, get you a little bit depressed, and they'll let them watch all the media that they're going to get. Because the animal rights groups they raise pretty close to $750 million US a year, almost $1 billion to get their message out. So you're already up against tough time. Whatever corporate, whatever university relations or hospital relations group you have, communications, and they put out an occasional press release or they push out a story to the local newspaper, it's nothing compared to how much money is being thrown against you. So when we do these focus groups, it's amazing to see that when they start, 51% of the women will support animals in research, and by the time we end, that number's up to 93%. But I'd like you to hear in their words, and understand, folks, this is the intellectual capacity of the general public. They haven't been through the master's programs and the PhD programs. So they are not at the same level you are, and you'll appreciate seeing what changes their mind and their thoughts.
Five months ago, my daughter was diagnosed with lupus, so now it's like I want my daughter to live, but don't hurt the animals. After today, I can tell you 100% that I support research for animals.
But as for the shift change, I got information that I didn't know existed on the research.
It was the story of the cancer patient. It put a face on a scientist. I mean, when we say these horrible scientists, the research, it's very obscure. But when you actually see what she does in the lab, how well she treats the animals, and then her story where this is benefiting her, then it makes me see how important the work is.
Well, it's the first time I've heard from the researcher side of how animals are treated during animal testing. And I just felt you're emotionally challenged when you see the terrorists because you hear of all these horrible things, and then no researchers come out and tell you that's not true. They are treated humanely. And that's given me a switch because you know that things have to be tested, and for the rest of us too.
Primarily, Jen's story struck me as like I've never realized medical research on animals versus my ignorance of what was really being going on with it. I've just, like I said on the thing, I was hearing so much about animal abuse, and the fact that she worked with the animals and to go through exactly what they are. And I think that the scientists need more support.
Yeah, my first reaction was, no, of course they don't want to hurt animals. You know, I mean, who would be a person that would want to hurt an animal? You know, nobody does that. You know, but then you thought more about it, and honestly, it's a subject I really hadn't thought too much about. And you know, you just think, oh, you get the medicine, and I honestly didn't think where it comes from or how it gets tested or anything. I just need it, you know. But after seeing the information in the story, I really started to think more on a personal level, like, oh, this is where, you know, this is how far back it goes. This is what comes into place to make you be able to take this medication.
Putting the human touch to it and the human side to it, it changed it from what was previously thought like an antiseptic, cruel environment to something that where you saw it created a need that there needs to be for medical research. It reminded me of the need, and it also put the compassion of the actual researchers on the front page where I had never thought about that before.
I really didn't know anything except what the extremists will tell you about the cruelty that the animals go through, and that was the big kicker for me, is learning that they're really well cared for.
Your heart hurts when you hear it's about animals. Like I said in the beginning, that there is no voice for them. But when I saw that the animals were in harnesses, and when I heard your guest speaker, when it's a humane thing to do, then it's okay. But if you do it in a humane way, and we have to because we're not going to test on ourselves, there has to be something. So, I mean, I totally was against any animal testing. And I have 4 cats at home, and I love them dearly. But if they could help me with my diabetes, I'd be all for it. And if it's in a humane way, I think it's a marvelous thing.
I'm here to announce that that lady's 4 cats now work at McGill. It's true. They got their own office. So you can tell they're not necessarily the sharpest tools in the shed, but they turn. They get it. I did a focus group in New York, and I had a woman about halfway through it start to cry hysterically. And I go, oh boy, here we go. And she said, if people understood what they do to cows, they would wise up and just buy their meat from grocery stores. It was very insightful. It was very helpful. Folks, I'm going to wrap with this. I'm going to close with this. I want you to understand that the folks opposed to the use of animals in research has nothing to do with the animals. Because you and I both know the animals that are used on study are taken care of much better than grandma is who's in a nursing home nearby. You know that your animals are seeing a veterinarian much more often than grandma's seeing a doctor. You know that your animals are being nurtured and enriched and taken care of and played with more often than any of our senior citizens are being played with. You know that your animals are healthy and fed well. You know good animals equal good science. You already know that. And we could say that argument as many times, but you know what the issue is? You're not doing this for free. The issue is the medications that are ultimately going to come down your pipeline 15 years from now, 7 years from now, 10 years from now, they're not going to be free. And what the people can't handle is that there is profit attached to the use of animals, and that's the exploitation that they're after. And why do I say it's not the animals? Because of the 87-54 rule. I love to run national polls where I ask in question number 1, if you found a mouse in your house under the kitchen sink, what would you do with it? 87% of the people say, kill that thing. Get it out of here. Question number 2, do you support the use of purpose-bred mice in animal research? Support from the same people drops down to 54%. You see, if it's in your house, it has no rights. But if it's in your lab and it's bred and it's taken care of and nurtured and enriched and seeing a veterinarian as part of a study, no, whoa, that animal's got rights. Isn't that amazing how that happens? In the United States, it's amazing that there's no protests against the largest mass murderer of animals, which are the pest companies. And in fact, the pest companies, Orkin, can do national spots and celebrate the fact that they kill animals and nobody cares.
You were not supposed to be back until Sunday. We could use the boy. Yeah. On drums.
Rodents want to make your home their home, but Orkin keeps them out. Get guaranteed protection from rats, mice, and all kinds of pests. Orkin, keeping pests in their place.
Now, I can assure you that if Orkin or any other terminators come to your house to take care of your rodents, they are not going to be put down as humanely as animals on study. You see, the point is, it's not about the animals. It's about the profit. And until we start talking about why we use the animals and where we're moving to, until we do that, they're going to make it about the animals. And I'm telling you, it's not. I want to wrap up with this, folks. The animal rights groups are growing. It's getting crazy. And they are effectively shutting down. They're finding the methods to do this, which is to shut down the breeders and to shut down the transportation and now put the pressure on the universities, and they want to put the pressure on the funding. They want to get the money out. The pharmaceutical companies and the biotech companies are saying, I don't want any part of this. So they're turning around and taking their research and handing it over to the CROs. The CROs are saying, I don't want to deal with this. So they're moving to far parts of the world to try to get away from the microscope. Now, the problem with that is we don't know how good the data becomes. And I'm sorry, if you're doing research in some parts of the world, I'm guessing it's probably not going to be as humane as it's done in other parts of the world. You know what I mean? We all know happy animals equals good science. And if they're not happy, we got issues. So I'm telling you, I'm here to encourage you. Anything you're doing in neuroscience is so incredibly important. But man, you guys are vulnerable because especially you're affiliated with the non-human primates. And people just don't get it. It is time for all of us to stand up and start talking about what we're doing. They want to start an insurgency? Fine. We need to start a revolution, and that revolution is one of communications and telling people. I'm here to tell you something. None of us are getting out alive. I'm good today. My wife is good today. My 3 sons are good today. But I don't know what the diagnosis is tomorrow. I don't know if I get my annual checkup and the doc says, hey, you got colon cancer. Someday the doc's going to say, you got Alzheimer's. My sons think I'm nuts already. It's going to hit all of us. And I want you to take a look at this. Folks, what you do is noble. It's honorable. You are here to improve the lives of not just Canadians, not just Americans, not white people, not black people, not Latino, not Hispanics, not Asians, everybody. Because none of us are getting out alive. I want you to look at something real quick. Our two countries are best friends. Look at the war deaths from two friends over 4 wars. In World War I, we lost 116,000. You lost 68,000. World War II, we lost 405,000 in the battlefield. You lost 47,000. Take it down to Korea and Afghanistan. In those 2 wars, in those 4 wars for 2 best friends, we lost 676,464 Americans and Canadians dead in combat. We think about the impact of war and we'll go, wow. So many things we feel. You know what? I've been to the funerals for the 19-year-old blown up in Iraq. And I saw the family and the widow and the baby and the parents, and I've seen the devastation. You can't even explain it. And I've been to the 39-year-old woman's funeral that died from breast cancer. And I've seen her husband there and the 3 lovely young daughters and the parents and everybody else. And you know what? I didn't notice any difference in the grief. It was devastation no matter how you looked at it. Yet, when I walk through an airport and I see an American soldier in uniform, male or female, I go up and say, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for being on the front lines for me. Thank you for working and protecting my liberty. And I wish every one of you would travel through an airport wearing your PPE or your lab coat so that I could see you are on the front lines of disease research. Why? Because in 2009, heart disease killed 599,000 Americans and 49,000 Canadians. In 2009, cancer killed 567,000 Americans and 71,000 here in Canada. Stroke took 128,000 in America and 14,000 in Canada, and chronic lower respiratory disease took 137,000 in the States and 10,000 here. Folks, 4 common wars over 95 years. Together, we lost 676,000 Canadians and Americans. But in 1 year, 4 diseases took 1.5 million of us. Now, you tell me, you are on the front lines of this. You see the impact of Alzheimer's. We're losing 72,000 a year, and that number's going up, and it's going up here. It's going up across the world. You are on the front lines of disease research. And if anybody in the world should be applauded and thanked for what you do, it is you folks. From this country to the next country and all around. You are on the front lines. Please don't ever forget that. You know that not only is it a grateful nation, it's a grateful world. I don't care if you're part of what religious group or what continent you came from, but those diseases are going to affect every one of us, and you're on the front lines of making that happen. Thank you for what you're doing. Don't let this thing get in your way. Keep fighting, keep pushing, keep getting urgency, keep fighting for what you know is right. Thank you.